Okay, are both sides ready with their openings?
Morning, Judge. Yes.
Morning, Your Honor. Andrew Kirkpatrick on behalf of Mr. Beller. We're ready to go.
Morning, Your Honor. Leonard Ballard on behalf of Mr. Morrison, ready to go.
Morning, Kareem Johnson, on behalf of Mr. Musico, ready to go.
Thank
Counsel.
you very much, Judge. Good morning and welcome back. Your sacrifice and kidney was great. Maybe sitting there when the next stage of trial is. We call this opening statement. Opportunity for us to talk to you a little bit about what you're going to see during the course of the trial. Okay, this is our opportunity to kind of give you a roadmap of what you're going to see in the witness stand and the exhibits that come in. Okay, the story is actually a very simple one. The story is that the defendants, Joe Morrison, Pete Musico, and Paul Bellar, formed a gang. And the name of the gang was the Wolverine Watchmen. And they used that gang to train a terrorist. His name was Adam Fox. And when they trained him, they used guns to train him. And they trained him knowing that Adam Fox had a plan to kill police officers, tried to start a civil war, and kidnap the governor of our state. A simple story. It's not as complex as it's been made out to you. Okay? Where they trained Adam Fox was out in Munich on Dunn Road. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why you're here today. What happened in Jackson County. Judge, can I have, I don't know if the first bar can be turned down, but can we turn the lights down here a little bit? I think that's it.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about what I like to call the rules of the road. And it's what we covered in voir dire. It's the instructions the judge gave you and will continue to give you. The first is presumption of innocence. I mean, as we sit here this morning, the defendants are presumed innocent. And that makes sense when we think about fairness in a trial. You don't make a decision until you get all the information that we have to get, and the information the defendants want. Okay? They enjoy that presumption of innocence throughout the trial until you begin your deliberations, and actually during your deliberations, and until you reach a verdict if you find the elements of the crime have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Further proof is on the prosecution. That makes sense. If you point the accusatory finger at somebody, you ought to be willing to back up what you're accusing them of. Each element must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Nothing more, nothing less. Nobody's going to inflate that. Nobody's going to whittle it down. Motive is something that you can consider. It's not an element, but you may ask yourself during the course of the trial, defendants have a reason to help a terrorist, and did they benefit from being in a gang? Evidence comes from the witness stand, any exhibits that are admitted during the trial, questions that are asked are not evidence. Direct and circumstantial evidence can be used to prove the elements of the crime charge, and as we talked about during voir dire, excuse me, both of these types of elements, Judge Wilson will instruct you, or both of these types of evidence rather are equal to each other. One is not superior to the other. Factors to consider in judging a witness's credibility: age, maturity, does the person have an interest in the case, and does the testimony agree with the other evidence of the case? Let's talk a little bit about the actual elements of the crimes charge. If you look behind the judge, there's a bookcase and there's 3 red binders. Excuse me. And those binders contain the Michigan criminal jury instructions. We have, all of us, the same jury instructions. Excuse me.
You're taking a sip of water. Did everybody that wanted a notepad get one in the other room? Then okay.
Thank you. First element is provided material support to Adam Fox or Barry Croft, and the judge is going to define for you what material support is. because it's in the jury instructions that we all have. It's training, personnel, facilities, or expert assistance. You heard me say a little while ago, the reason you are here today is because what the defendants did, they trained Adam Fox out on Dunn Road here at Jackson County, and that's what brings us together. The second element is that when they provided this material support, they knew that Adam Fox would use it in full or just in part. Plan or prepare or carry out or facilitate or to avoid apprehension. Okay. Finally, the third element is for an act of terrorism. Be fine for you. Quite simply put, the violent felony, dangerous to human life, and intended to intimidate a unit of government. The gang charge. First element is the defendant was a member of a gang. The judge will define this for you. And a gang is 5 or more people. It is not a registered nonprofit corporation. And the first time I read this, you may be asking yourself, well, how many gangs are a nonprofit corporation? The reason that is in is because, it was suggested to you during voir dire that a church could be a gang. No, it cannot. The church is a 501c3 corporation. And that's exactly why that that part of the instruction is in. Gang or the group had a common name, sign, or symbol. The Wolverine Watchmen had all 3 of these. The leadership of which all 3 defendants were a part of in this gang. It had a leadership or command structure. And finally, the membership had a criteria. You'll hear more about the vetting process of what the Wolverine Watchmen did to screen potential members of their gang during the course of the trial. Second element is the defendant committed a felony in support of an act of terrorism. And finally, the third element, the gang provided the motive, the means, or opportunity for committing the crime. Okay. And during the course of this trial, you'll see that everybody in the Wolverine Watchmen shared a very common ideology, and that they hated our government. They wanted to kill law enforcement, police officers, and that the gang gave them the motive, means, and opportunity to train Adam Fox, knowing that he was going to commit an act of terrorism. Third crime, felony firearm. First element is the defendant possessed a firearm at the time he committed a felony. In this case, the other felony is providing material support for a terroristic act. That is, while they trained Adam Fox out on Dunn Road near Munich, they used guns while doing so. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the gang itself. And what you have here is not a depiction of the entire gang. I mean, we'll provide that for you in an exhibit during the course of the trial. But one of the things you're going to see is that the gang had over 40 people. Now, the reason that we have this for your review is what you have on top here is Adam Fox on the right and Barry Croft on the left. And I'd like you to think of Barry Croft as the national contact of Joe Morrison. Barry Croft was somebody that hated the American government very much. He wanted to initiate a multi-state civil war that would eventually lead to the overthrow of the American government. And he was aligned with Adam Fox, who was his Michigan contact, and Joe Morrison, who was another of Barry Croft's Michigan contacts. In the middle row here, we have Joe Morrison on the left, Pete Musico in the middle, and Paul Bellar on the right. On the bottom are some other individuals, Caleb Franks, Amanda Keller, the girlfriend of Adam Fox, Ty Garvin, he was a member of the Wolverine Watchmen also, along with two depictions of an undercover FBI agent who will testify for you. It's undercover agent Mark. And finally, Dan. And Dan was a confidential human source for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And Dan became a member of the Wolverine Watchmen. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And essentially, he is going to be your eyes and ears into the world of Joe Morrison, Paul Bellar, and Pete Musico. Okay? Talk a little bit about genesis of the Wolverine Watchmen. The time it began, it was founded in November of 2019. And I think probably a very important point to make right now is this, during voir dire, it was suggested to you that the pandemic could cause great frustration, probably was something that, caused the defendants. It was suggested that was the pandemic was something that was suggested that this is what caused the defendants to do what they did. Well, you'll see during the course of the trial that the Wolverine Watchmen were founded months before the pandemic really came into existence in terms of March or February of 2020. And also, you're going to learn the reason that Joe Morrison founded this, and at the time he was 25. And keep in mind, Pete Musico is his father-in-law. They reside together at the Dunn Road address where they hosted the trainings for where they taught military type techniques, weapons handling, how to go into a house and clear it, ambushes, vehicle firing from your vehicle. These were the kinds of things that they taught out of their house, and including to Adam Fox. You'll see here the day that they were founded, they put up a Facebook page. This is a public facing page that they use to recruit fellow members. Keep in mind, and you'll see during the course of the trial, is that recruitment was very important, especially in the early months of the gang. The more people they had, the more formidable force they could present. Okay, and it's difficult to see here, but you can see that they use different handles, different monikers for their own names. And this is Crystal Pete Musico, and he displays that he's one of the founding members of the Wolverine Watchmen. At the time, Pete Musico was 42 when they created the gang, and they called the gang the Wolverine Watchmen. And the purpose of the gang, again, was quite simply to train others in military tactics, getting ready for what they believed would be the eventual overthrow of our government. Paul Bellar joined the gang on the ground floor. He was one of the earliest members, and because of that, he joined the leadership group. And what we have here is a picture of Mr. Morrison on the left and Mr. Bellar on the right. And you can see they're what you will come to know as fully kitted up, meaning they have their ballistic armor on, long guns, extra ammunition, and pistols. And you might be sitting there wondering, well, what are these two men doing all geared up at the Capitol outdoors in the middle of winter? A little bit ago, I mentioned to you that recruitment was very important to them. They wanted to grow their gang so they could have as many people as possible. And they also wanted to have people spread out across the state. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment here. But this is one of the exhibits you'll see, and you're going to hear testimony that they would go to the Capitol dressed like this with great regularity, looking for other members, and it worked. They were able to recruit through this. So between the Facebook page and attending these kind of events, they use these events for recruitment. This is Joe Morrison, obviously a different time of year, back at the Capitol, fully kitted up. And at the time, he was a Marine reservist in the United States Marine. Now, he later quit that because he wanted to focus on the gang. And getting back to the reason that Joe Morrison founded this gang, in November of 2019, we founded the gang and started it on Facebook. He had just been sentenced in Macomb County for carrying a pistol illegally. And this made Joe Morrison angry for months. Talk about motive, why people do what they do. There's usually a reason for why people take certain actions. Much of what we do as humans is not by mistake. And he was very motivated against the government because he felt that he had been wrong when he was convicted of carrying this illegal pistol. That was one of the moments in time that was the genesis of the Wolverine Watchman. He started the Wolverine Watchman 5 days after he was sentenced. Pete Musico is on the left here. And again, he is the father-in-law of Joe Morrison. And again, they reside out on Dunn Road in Munich. And Pete Musico is a guy that has been marinating in conspiracy theories his entire life. He is angry at the government, and he wants to support. He wants to have something more in his life than what he's got at the current time. And he didn't want anybody from the government telling him what to do. On the right is Paul Belloc. Again, taking a selfie of himself and very proud of his gear: ballistic armor, long gun, sidearm, extra ammunition, medical kit. He was, as I mentioned earlier, joined the Wolverine Watchman on the ground floor, ladies and gentlemen. And he professed to have two very good skills. One, weapons handling, and he actually became a trainer for the Wolverine Watchman out on Dunn Road. And he also had some knowledge in combat field trauma. He became the group's medic, and he would teach medical, how to survive a gunshot wound and the different trainings they had. He shared the hatred of the police with Joe Morrison. They had a very common, like-minded position on it. So, I think we've talked about this, through Dan, because Dan made recordings of the defendants during these trainings. And I'll talk more about that here, but we're going to tell the story through the defendants' own words. And it's not just their spoken words, it's also going to be their written words, okay? And this is an example of what you're going to see here. This is the first post by Joe Morrison on the public-facing Facebook page that they use for recruitment. And there's a couple of things that I want to go through in this with you. I mean, the purpose of the gang was to target law enforcement for violent action, okay? What I'm talking about here is Mr. Morrison, Mr. Musico, and Mr. Bellar. They wanted to kill police officers. And let's go through the description of, this is Joe Morrison's words now. The Wolverine Watchman is a group of patriots. Let's stop there for a minute. You're going to find that during the course of this trial, they use words in a way that most people don't. Because when they use the word patriots, and they use some coded words too, it's part of their ideology. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but a better way to think of this is, when you're on Facebook, if you promote violence, you will not be on very long. They will kick you off for that, okay? So they use different words to describe what they were talking about. And if you can think of a synonym for patriots, think of terrorists, okay? To network and assemble, okay? They wanted to bring a larger group to bear because a larger group has more force, and to also have their gang be spread out around the state, okay? So that they could respond to anything they didn't like in a more quick fashion. Recruit like-minded individuals, and the type of individual they're looking for is people who hate police officers and are not afraid to do harm to them, and people who hate our government. Their goal was to target law enforcement. Develop regional QRFs. What is a QRF, you may be asking? They called it a quick reactionary force. This is a military term. And what they're really talking about here is the idea that they would have different groups spread out across the state, and these groups could respond to anything they didn't like that the government was doing or the police were doing in a moment's notice. And when I say respond, I don't mean just drive out and watch what's going on. They would respond in ballistic armor, long guns, sidearms, extra ammunition. We'll talk more about these QRFs later on. Squad tactics. This is what I referenced earlier. When they were at Dunn Road, they would practice these different things like breaching doors, entering a home, clearing bedrooms, firing from motor vehicles, how to stage an assault, how to repel an assault. So these are the squad tactics that are being spoken about in the first post. Now, here's where the next sentence, we really begin to learn that at the earliest stages of this gang called the Wolverine Watch, they knew what they were doing was wrong and illegal. Only add people you trust. No statist. Statist is an individual who supports the state and believes that, we're a rule of law community. No FUDs. That is a reference to Elmer Fudd from the old cartoons. And they thought of people who were hunters who used their weapons only occasionally were like Elmer Fudd. And they didn't want any of those types in their group. They wanted young, aggressive individuals who were willing to go after law enforcement and kill them. No bootlickers. That's another synonym with status. A bootlicker to them was somebody who lives by the rule of law in our community, follows the rules, and believes that that's the right thing to do. And they certainly, very clear right here, no cops and no feds. Okay? They didn't want anybody with law enforcement in their group because they knew what they were doing was wrong and illegal. You're going to hear the word tyrant used by the defendants during the course of this trial, and the evidence is going to have that. And they considered law enforcement to be, police officers to be tyrants. People didn't have the right to tell them what to do. And the threat that they saw the need for the QRFs was the police. And they thought the police were tyrants. The purpose of this gang, ladies and gentlemen, is terrorism. Still talking a little bit about the genesis of the gang, how it got off the ground. I told you that we would tell this story with the defendant's own words, with their own writings. through Dan. Other evidence that was acquired during the course of the investigation. Search warrants were issued. Search warrant is Special Agent Impola. He's a member of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I would write the search warrant, take it to an independent judge. I mean, all judges are independent, obviously, but take it to a judge and say, Judge, I think there's evidence of a crime going on here, and I want to look at their Facebook page. Judge reads the search warrant, agrees that there's probable cause for search. The search warrant is issued by the judge. That is sent to Facebook, and then it comes, and then Facebook returns literally thousands of pages of documents. Okay, and it's the documents pertaining to that Facebook page that Joe Morrison started back in November of 2019. Okay, now talking about the genesis of the gang again. I'm going to play you an audio clip here, and this is Pete Musico talking about, or really, taking credit for the idea of the gang of the Wolverine Watchmen. Earlier, I told you about, and you read actually, Joe Morrison's own statement that he wants to have QRFs, quick reactionary forces around the state to respond to a moment's notice of anything like. When you think of QRFs, and this is a good moment to probably add context. Listen to what Pete Musico has to say about gangs of his youth.
When I set forth this group, all right, because this Wolverine Watchman was my fucking idea. It wasn't Joe's. It wasn't anybody else's. Wolverine Watchman was my idea that I planted the seed in Joe's head. And when Joe started talking to younger guys, I said, it's all you, buddy, because it's your generation, not mine.
Right.
70% of what Wolverine Watchmen went through and agreed upon, 60 to 70% of those ideas that were brought to the table, I had a hand in it.
Right. No, good, more than that, I'd say.
Need to move the podium just
I'm just saying.
Right.
So,
From
my whole intention on that group was to build a group, have it your area, somebody else's area, somebody else's area. You got fucking 30 guys, that guy's got 40 guys, that guy's got 50 guys. Dude, I used to run with gangbangers. That's how they were successful. Period.
Right.
That dude had 20 guys with him. That dude had 20 guys with him. That dude had 20 guys with him. Everybody had their own little sets, their own little crews. But when I called for a meeting, everybody showed up.
Right.
And that's the way I wanted to set this up. And that's the way this whole movement has gone.
Right.
What movement is, well, first of all, before I get to the movement, I mean, you can see how when you see the first post of Joe Morrison with he wants to establish QRFs, you can see where he got the idea from his father. Okay, and this, Musico paints a very accurate picture. Hey, you're a more powerful force if you got 20 guys over here, 15 guys over there, and 20 guys over there. That's what Joe Morrison wanted to develop in his gang that he called the Wolverine Watchmen. Let's talk a little bit about the ideology of the Wolverine Watchmen. I mean, they had a belief system, and they called it the Boogaloo. And the Boogaloo is not something that Joe Morrison or Pete Musico or Paul Bellar came up with. The Boogaloo is a national movement. It is a known quantity. And essentially, it's a code. And, you're going to hear that they use different words. One of the reasons they did is because they didn't want to get kicked off Facebook, because they're using Facebook for recruitment and they want to grow their numbers. And the Boogaloo was a term they used to describe what they thought would be the next civil war. And, you might be asking yourself, well, and again, why? And this kind of goes back to motive. Why is this going on? Why do these guys want to do this? I mean, I explained to you Joe Morrison's motive about being angry about being convicted, and he started the gang 5 days later. But you're also going to see there's other motive in play with all three defendants. And that is, at the time this is unfolding, there's not very much going on in their lives. And I'm being polite when I say this is the most important thing delivering Watchmen that any of these three men has ever done from their own perspective. Okay? They took this very seriously. They took the idea of starting a civil war very seriously. These guys were dangerous. The Boogaloo, as they called it, it sounds kind of like a cute word, but it's not. It's one of their code words. And it was used to describe the next civil war. I mean, this was part of their belief system. And they referred to themselves as Boog Boys. You know, and Boog Boys are people that adhere to the Boogaloo movement. And you're going to hear evidence during the course of the trial that they compared themselves to the Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen are, and you'll hear testimony about this, were guerrilla warfare fighters, typically in the Middle East, members of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban have been called themselves the Mujahideen. Okay, and you're going to hear testimony that these defendants considered themselves very similar to the Mujahideen here in America. Some of the other code words that they used were the big dance. What they meant by that was the kickoff of the next American Civil War. They wanted this to happen because they weren't doing anything else. And they used that term to get through Facebook and also in a tongue-in-cheek manner amongst themselves. You're going to hear about the big luau. That was another synonym for the Boogaloo or the big dance. And I'll talk about why they make that line reference in a moment. Pete Musico described it as Fallujah in the United States. Now, this is a posting of Paul Bella. And he says, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm a Boog Boy. I'm with the Boogaloo. And what you're going to learn during the course of this trial is these guys hated all police officers. They hated all politicians. And it didn't matter what party they came from. This is a posting by Joe Morrison, and his handle or his nickname that he goes by, his own that he chose, is Boogaloo Bunny. Okay, and this posting makes clear what his intent is. They hated Governor Whitmer and they hated President Trump rather as much as they hated Governor Whitmer. Okay, this is not about politics for them. They hate anybody in power, which is why they hate politicians and why they wanted to kill police officers. Talk a little bit about motive again. Okay, what's their motive for the Boogaloo? Well, they figured that if they could kick off the next Civil War, they would be the next ones in power because in anarchy, and that's what they wanted. I mean, during the course of this trial, you're going to see these are anarchists. They wanted anarchy, and by their calculations, might makes right. And if our gang is big and powerful during anarchy, we're going to thrive. Okay. They wanted to move to heaven. They did. Let's talk a little bit more about the symbols and of the Boogaloo. Here is a posting by Joe Morrison, and you see he's captioned it with, again, I am Boogaloo Bunyan, his own handle that he chose for himself. Support your local Mujahideen, and then the Wolverine Watchman, the name of his gang. And the Mujahideen was a play on words that they came up with. And it's a combination of the Mujahideen, as I talked about a moment ago. These are Middle East fighters in the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. And he considered himself a local Mujahideen. And when that Boogaloo kicked off, they were going to kill any police officers, sheriff's deputies, state troopers, anybody who got in their way. Let's talk a little bit about some more of the symbols of their belief, because when you drill down into the symbols of their ideology, you begin to see how deep it really is. On the left is Pete Musico, the front of Pete Musico's ballistic armor. And on it, he's got the name of his gang, the Wolverine Watchmen. Upside down American flag, upside down state of Michigan flag, signaling his belief that America is in distress and Pete Musico is here to save it. You see that he considers himself an infidel to the American way of life. They use these symbols so that when they were at public events like the capital recruiting efforts that they would attend, they could communicate who they were to other people, because these symbols are known in the Boogaloo movement. The big luau, you'll see on the flag on the left, this is on the back of Joe Morrison and Pete Musico's truck. There's two things. There's an igloo, and the igloo is a symbol of the Boogaloo, and it's a play on words again. And again, it's a way to navigate Facebook without getting kicked off. The big igloo is one of the things they talked about. The big igloo being the kickoff of the next Civil War that they had. In the middle of the flag, you'll see a stripe, and that stripe is a Hawaiian print. And earlier I talked about the big luau. Okay, you'll hear testimony during the course of the trial that they describe the beginning of anarchy as the big luau, and they use that again to skirt Facebook. And they used this is part of their uniform. They actually had, this was part of their uniform is Hawaiian print clothing. When they were out in public, if they wore that kind of thing, people would know that's a boogaloo. Okay. This is Joe Morrison, and he's you see him on the right. He's in his uniform. He's got his Hawaiian shirt on. He's back recruiting at another public event. He's in full kit again. You can see his ballistic armor and his extra ammunition there. And the hat on his head is displayed on the left. And you can see the igloo and the Hawaiian print. And he's even gone so far as to find the patch Mujahideen, again, a play off of the word Mujahideen, guerrilla fighters, and he has that on the back of his hat. So again, we can tell much about a person's intent by what they do, how they do it, and what they say. And these three men made no bones about being part of the Boogaloo. This is a picture of Paul Bellar. It's a selfie that he took of himself, again, with the Boogaloo flag that he's posted. Okay. You're going to hear during the course of the trial that Paul Bellar was a member of this gang, and in fact, he was one of the most aggressive gang members. Okay, some might say the most dangerous. Okay, this was a guy who didn't fear anything. Okay, and he's proficient in his weapons handling too. We talked about the QRFs earlier, and there were 3 QRFs that you're going to hear about during this trial, and they all occurred in May of 2020. And Bellar was a member of each of these QRFs. In fact, a very aggressive member and one that wanted to participate. On the 3rd of May of 2020, that's a Sunday in the afternoon, a nice day. Home Depot in Fenton, Michigan. People were there going in to buy their paint, plumbing supplies, busy day. And Paul Bellar called for a QRF to respond to the Home Depot in Fenton, Michigan on May 3rd of 2020. And the reason this evidence is being given to you during the course of this trial is because it goes a long way to showing Paul Bellar's hatred for the police, and that he was willing to take violent action. And he called for a QRF to respond to the Home Depot. And the reason he did is because a fellow gang member named Alex, and remember, I mean, there's over 40 people in this gang, and we're going to show you the full lineup during the course of the trial. But Alex, a fellow gang member of the Wolverine Watchmen, was going to sell a gun part to someone. And he thought both he and Bellar believed this to be an illegal transaction. Okay. And they were going to do it. They were going to do the sale in the parking lot of the Home Depot. And Paul Bellar called for a QRF, and he got what he wanted. He got a number of people to go with him, all geared up, ballistic armor, long guns, sidearms, extra ammunition, because he was going to go up there and protect his fellow gang member. And when they got there, this is what Paul Bellar said he was going to do if somebody tried to arrest his friend Alex. And I'll ask you to think to yourself while you're listening to this, does that sound defensive to me?
I'd say, in your truck, just keep your truck in big close, okay? Because if I see someone going fucking snatch out the bag, I'm shooting the thing. I'm defending Alex right away. I will not let a fucking try to grab a guy.
Yeah, he was not going to let a Fed or a police officer grab his fellow gang member. Goes a long way towards telling you a little bit about what Paul Bellar is all about, and whether or not he was prepared to bring violence to the police. Okay. Pete Musico again. Okay. Now, earlier I talked to you a little bit about Barry Croft. Reminder, Barry Croft, think of him as the national contact for the Boogaloo movement. He knows Joe Morrison and he knows Adam Fox. And if you will, the way that Joe Morrison and Adam Fox get connected, think of Barry Croft as their matchmaker. Okay, because Barry Croft knew both of them. Barry Croft, wanted to connect them because Barry Croft wanted to have, just like Pete Musico wanted to have, and Joe Morrison, these QRFs all over the state of Michigan. Barry Croft from Delaware wanted to have that kind of organization in multiple states. And the vision was that when the Boogaloo kicked off, it would kick off in multiple states, because that would have a greater effect on our American government and our way of life. And so Barry Croft, think of him as the national contact, and Joe Morrison and Adam Fox as his Michigan connections. The Barry Croft hosts a meeting down in Dublin, Ohio. And he has this meeting in June of 2020. And the purpose of the meeting is to bring these like-minded individuals all together from different states, Missouri, Indiana, Virginia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and bring like-minded people together so that they could begin coordinating their attacks. These guys were serious, ladies and gentlemen, and you're going to see that during the course of this trial. And Joe Morrison is invited to this meeting in Dublin, Ohio, as the Wolverine Watchman's leader. And it is discussed, and you're going to hear evidence during the course of the trial. Should we go to Dublin? Is that something we want to do? And in the end, they didn't go. And the reason they didn't go isn't because they said, well, Barry Croft, he's a little too violent for us. We're not going to do that. No, the reason they didn't go is because they were afraid they were walking into a trap where either they would be killed by other like-minded individuals, or that they would be arrested by the police or law enforcement. Okay, so the meeting in Dublin, Ohio, think of it as the national contact meeting. They did not attend. Okay, but after that meeting, Joe Morrison did communicate with Barry Croft, and Barry Croft told him, you need to get a hold of Adam Fox. And within 20 minutes of that conversation happening, or Joe Morrison getting that information, Joe Morrison is reaching out to Adam Fox on Facebook. Okay, Joe Morrison wanted to find a terrorist to train. And there's a conversation in June where Pete Musico is explaining the purpose of a meeting that is scheduled with Adam Fox and members of the Wolverine Watchmen. Because after the Dublin meeting, Croft tells Morrison to get a hold of Fox. He does so, and they schedule a meeting to meet in person. And this is Pete Musico's explanation for what that meeting is all about. And the point of this evidence is that Joe Morrison, Paul Bellar, and Pete Musico knew what Adam Fox was all about, and they still went ahead and trained them.
But I'm assuming this movie came with what went down.
This meeting is pertaining to kicking the booze off. Yeah. That's the point, but I'm gonna let you know right now. This ain't about fucking like get prepped and ready to go. This is about pointing rifles at fucking police officers and fucking politicians and streets and fucking triggers. Yeah, this ain't no joke. This is starting Fallujah in the United States. That's what he's talking about. Yeah, what are you talking about? You listen to his message. His message is, listen, you fucking pussies. Quit running your fucking dick sucker and let's do something.
That's Pete Musico describing why they want to meet with Adam Fox. Okay, you can hear the excitement in his voice. And when he says, "This isn't about getting prepped. This is about pointing rifles at police officers and politicians and squeezing the trigger. This ain't no joke." Now there's context there. Joe Morrison again, back at the Capitol, still recruiting, obviously a different time of year. And on the same day that Pete Musico made the statement you just heard, Joe Morrison and Pete have a conversation. And what you're about to hear is Pete asking if he understands the purpose of the meeting, Pete asking Joe if he understands the purpose of the meeting with Adam Fox. And you'll hear Joe's reply that he does. He understands completely.
But I mean, point blank, that's what these guys for. You know, Adam. Yeah. You know what he's down for? Yeah. Straight out picking that shit off. Okay.
Kicking it off. You're talking about kicking off the Boogaloo. Big dance, the luau. That's what Pete Musico is talking about, and Joe Morrison saying, yeah, I know why we're meeting with Adam Fox. And you go ahead and do it. Go ahead and send it to Paul Bellar as a representative of the Wolverine Watchmen to sit down with Adam Fox and begin coordinating. Now, 2 months later, fast forward to August here with me for a moment. They're out on Dunn Road. And Joe Morrison's there. In this instance, Mr. Musico and Mr. Bellar are not present. And training Adam Fox again in the use of weapons and how to be a better terrorist. And Adam Fox is having a conversation with Joe Morrison. And he asks Joe Morrison if he's down for kidnapping high asset people. And Joe Morrison's response is, you know I am.
We deal with taking time. Taking what? I had people. Making them fall off the face here for you do it. Listen, I am. You on board?
You know I'm down, is what Joe Morrison says. And the high asset people, and they're talking code here, is the governor of our state. Okay? And remember, they didn't dislike her because of her politics. They were angry at her because they thought they were being wronged by the COVID restrictions. Okay? And remember, they hated our governor as much as they hated our president. Okay? They didn't care what the politics were, Republican, Democrat, anybody in power is who these men hated. And what he's talking about there is killing our governor. During the course of this trial, and we've heard already statements here that we believe will be entered into evidence, they weren't going to have any problem targeting police officers. The governor of our state, going back to the 1960s, is continuously guarded by very brave members of the Michigan State Police. I mean, these are members of the Michigan State Police that when they volunteer for this detail, they know they may have to give their lives in the line of duty. And what they were going to do is they were going to target the governor, Adam Fox was, kill the entire security detail, kidnap her, and later kill her. I mean, that's the terrorists they train. Okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the things the gang did to avoid detection by law enforcement. They called it operational security, or OPSEC for short. And the reason they used this is because they knew what they were doing was illegal and they didn't want to get caught. In fact, they talked about when they decided not to go to Dublin and meet with Barry Croft and the other individuals from different states. They talked about if we go down there, our whole leadership team would be taken out. They took their operational security very seriously. Now, this is kind of a point in time when you're going to hear some evidence about the gang itself and why it was a gang. They used the Facebook page as an outward public-facing vehicle to recruit people from. They vetted their members. In other words, you couldn't just sign up for to be a member. You had to answer questions from them. Questions like, how do you feel about law enforcement? What kind of weapons do you have? What can you bring to the table? Also, a common question that was asked is, how do you feel about being called a domestic terrorist in the near future? Okay. And the people who got vetted and answered the questions correctly were allowed to join their gang, the Wolverine Watcher. And once you got through the vetting process, though, Facebook was left in the rear view mirror. The reason it was is because they knew what they were doing was wrong. And they transitioned the member now from Facebook onto an encrypted chat platform that worked off of computers or your cell phone. What that really means is encrypted communication means only the people on each end of the communication can understand, can read it or hear it or see it. Okay. It's encrypted. It cannot be intercepted in the middle, for instance, by law enforcement or the police. You couldn't ask for a search warrant to let you into this chat because there's no way technologically to get into it. When something's encrypted, you're not going to break it, okay? And they would require members to not bring their phones to training because they didn't want any pictures taken. They wanted to avoid that. They were also afraid somebody might be recording them. And they did all this. It was designed to keep the police out of the group. And remember Joe Morrison's first post on Facebook no cops, no feds, okay? All this operational security was aimed at keeping law enforcement out of the game. Now, what they didn't count on was Dan. Dan is going to be a witness in this trial, and he is, at the time, he was 33 years old, and he had just returned from service in the United States Army, serving our country in Iraq for 2 tours. You're going to hear at the end of the day, Dan is a combat veteran. When he left the United States Army, he was a sergeant, and he had seen plenty of real action in Iraq. He was wounded and was honorably discharged, came back to Michigan, knew that he had a certain skill set, the skill set that he learned in the United States Army about how to handle weapons and how to train effectively. And he viewed those skills as perishable because they are. And he wanted to maintain these skills. In fact, he wanted to open up a gun range and become a firearms instructor here in the state of Michigan. And he found the Wolverine Watchman's Facebook page. This is the public facing page. And he reached out to Joe Morrison through Facebook. And in his first contact with Joe Morrison, he obviously described a little bit about his background. Hey, you know, I'm a U.S. Army vet, served 2 tours in Iraq. I'm back here. I'd like to train people who know what they're doing. Okay, it's a sense, that's the essence of the communication. My point is, during his first contact with Joe Morrison, before Dan has concerns about what he's got himself into, he has divulged that he is a combat veteran. He answers the vetting questions and is admitted into the game. He doesn't understand what it is yet. But once he gets on this encrypted chat, which is called Wire, okay, that's the name of the encrypted chat that the Wolverine Watchman gang members use to talk with each other. He gets into this encrypted chat, and it's immediately after he's been communicating with Facebook, Joe Morrison. And in the encrypted chat, he sees they're talking about trying to get police officers' home addresses. This is the first day that he's on this chat, literally within minutes. He looks at this and he sees they're trying to get police officers' home addresses, target them for violence. He doesn't waste any time. He doesn't wait a week, doesn't wait a day, he doesn't wait an hour. He calls the police. In fact, he calls Dave Ramirez, who's a friend of his, and he's also a sworn Mount Morris Township police officer. And Dave Ramirez comes out to where Dan is. Police officer Ramirez looks at what's on Dan's phone and sees what they're talking about, targeting police officers and trying to get their home addresses, or as it's put at one point during the Wolverine Watchman's existence, everybody's got it. Okay? These guys are serious. He shows Dave Ramirez, look, I don't know if this is something or not. Dave Ramirez says, yeah, it is. And Dave Ramirez gets it. Henrik Impala, special agent of the FBI out of the Flint Resident Agency Office. Okay. And he begins the investigation. Special Agent Impala meets with Dan, and the Wire, the encrypted app of Wire doesn't allow you to take screenshots. It prevents that because it doesn't want you moving information that's on it to anybody else. You want to try to limit what you can do in these chats. And it's, if you think of it, it's just like text messaging, only it's encrypted, okay? And you can't screenshot it and save it and send it to somebody else. Special Agent Henrik Impala meets with Dan, looks at his phone, and finds very concerning and troubling content on it about what the Wolverine Watchmen are all about. At this point in time, Dan is asked to become a confidential human source for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. What that really means is he is asked to be the eyes and ears into the Wolverine Watchmen so it can be determined what they're all about and what threat level they really are, showing. Because at this point in time, all they got is some wired chats. We were talking about targeting police officers with violence at their homes. Dan, there is no upside for Dan to do this. And remember, when Dan believes in, you're going to learn that, Dan believes in public service, but when he's asked to do this, he is initially reluctant. And anybody would be. I mean, you want me to continue to, work with these guys who are well-armed, well-trained, and go in there. I'm not a law enforcement officer. And, bring a recording device so that you will know what they say. You don't have to rely on what Dan says. Okay. And it's a threat to his personal safety. You're going to learn that he actually had to move, protect himself and his family. He had to actually sell a car, get a different vehicle. You're going to hear that Dan was paid and that Dan didn't make a nickel off this. Okay, this was a money-losing situation for him too. So not only was he asked to risk his own life again, but he actually ended up in an economic downside. And there's no upside for Dan to do this. Yet he did it. The reason he did it, I think you're going to be seeing him testify, because he believes in our country and he's a very brave guy. Okay. Okay, let's go back to a timeline here. Wolverine Watchmen are created in November, 5 days after Joe Morrison's sentence on that case out of Macomb County. He was angry as a hornet about it. You're going to hear testimony, as I said earlier, that he was angry for months afterwards. Dan joins the gang on March the 7th of 2020. And thereafter, you're going to start hearing about really the concerning activities that are going on out at Dunn Road in Munich, which is what brings us all together here today. And Dan attended firearms tactical trainings out there in Munich. And again, this is the home of Joe Morrison and Pete Musico. And this is where they practiced offensive military maneuvers. Okay. Now keep in mind, when Dan first has contact with Joe Morrison, he explains to Joe on Facebook, yeah, I'm just back from the U.S. Army. I like to find some people to train with, like to keep my skills sharp. He's already told Joe his background. Joe likes that idea. They were searching for combat veterans because they knew they would have skills in fighting. And so Dan is put in a difficult situation here. One that he actually handled with a lot of grace. The difficult situation is his instructions from Henrik Impola, in the FBI, are very clear. No, you must not aggravate the situation. You cannot be the originator of any ideas. And whatever training you got in the military, the only thing that you should be offering to them if they ask, and only if you're tasked, is the most rudimentary training that you might think of. In fact, think of what you can find on the public internet. Okay. And in order for Dan to stay in this gang and be the eyes and ears, he had to take on the role of a gang member. He had to play that role. If he didn't, if it became obvious that he was an informant, his life would be at risk. Okay. In addition to over a half dozen firearms trainings out in Munich, in April, they're still recruiting. Okay. There's Joe Morrison, Paul Bellar, and Pete Musico are still recruiting. And they do a lot of this down at the Capitol. And whenever they can find a protest or a march, they get all kitted up, get all their ballistic armor on, their long gun, their sidearm, extra ammunition, And they go down not because they really are protesting, stomping their feet, as you've heard. They're really down there to see if they can provoke confrontation and see if they can get more members into their group. And what you see here is a picture of, from right to left, is Joe Morrison, Paul Bellar, Pete Musico on the right, Paul Bellar in the middle, and Joe Morrison in the red plaid. And they've gone to this protest, and technically, what they're doing is not illegal. I mean, there's no prohibition against open carry, but they're in our capital, and they're down there, and really at the end of the day, it's not illegal to be dangerous. Think of it like that. I'm going to get into a little bit more about what went on in the Capitol in a minute here. But they're down there, and they're there to make themselves heard, and they would love to have a confrontation with the police at this point. Again, they also use it for a recruiting opportunity. And what this kind of evidence shows is the defendant's anger and hatred for our government. And it's the motive to train a terrorist, that terrorist being Adam Fox. During the same day, and you'll notice on this day, Adam Fox isn't in this picture. And the same day, this is Pete Musico, and he's confronting a state trooper. That trooper's name is Darren Green. Darren Green's going to testify for you. He's a lieutenant of the Michigan State Police, and he's going to tell you about this day in the Capitol, and that, yes, technically, they were there legally, even though they were armed, and that the description from Darren Green will be very vivid in terms of the dangerousness that was going on in the Capitol that day, and the fact that people like Pete Musico were trying to provoke the troopers in that Capitol that day, who were just trying to do their job and keep people safe. They were trying to provoke these troopers into a physical, violent confrontation. And when you see how they were armed, you can imagine how that would have ended. It would have been a very bad day. Paul Bellar also attended that event. You see him here in a picture. He's up on the rotunda, second level of the Capitol, in his full kit, long gun, sidearm, extra ammunition. He's even got his face covered up a little bit. And that's while he is there, his picture is taken by another photographer, and the picture captures him and Joe Morrison together. That picture that was taken by the other photographer wound up in Forbes magazine. It may be they may try to offer to you that they weren't doing anything illegal in the Capitol. Technically, I would agree. But when you wind up in Forbes magazine, the event was significant. Okay, this was a significant event this day in the Capitol. You're going to hear from not only Darren Green, but other troopers I'll touch on here, and how dangerous this event was, and how badly they wanted to provoke the police into a violent confrontation. Picture that was taken, Paul Bellar and Joe Morrison wound up in Forbes. And this is what Paul Bellar had to say after he learned of his picture being in Forbes magazine. Caption at the top is, "Holy shit, Paul made it on Forbes. Nice." His response was, and remember, his handle is Doc1776. What that refers to is he's the gang's medic, and also he trains everybody in field combat trauma. And the 1776 is a twisted reference. He believes that he's like a patriot. He's going to free us all in the American government. And he said, if you want context about what Paul Bellar is all about, it's right there, ladies and gentlemen, that moment when all your friends start noticing you weren't kidding that you're down for killing tyrants. That's what he wrote when he learned that his picture was in Forbes, and that's Joe Morrison in the picture too, right next to him with the hat on. And when he's talking about killing tyrants, that's another instance of this code word. He thinks the police are tyrants. He thinks all elected officials are tyrants. Here we are. Look who showed up. Adam Fox in his Boogaloo uniform with the Hawaiian print shirt, long gun slung over his arm, sidearm, and ballistic armor. And the young lady in the Michigan State Police Trooper uniform facing him or facing outward, and they're standing in front of the house chamber doors at this point. Her name is Rachel Rainey, and this is a very brave young lady who serves our state as a Michigan State Trooper. She also serves our nation in the United States Marine Reserves, and she is a gunnery sergeant. And when Joe Morrison was in the reserves before he quit so that he could focus on the Wolverine Watchman, Trooper Rainey was his gunnery sergeant. And because of that relationship, I mean, she knew Joe Morrison and she saw him getting radicalized. She saw, you know, that he was becoming radicalized with the Boogaloo movement, and she became so concerned. She did the same thing Dan did, because when Dan saw that they were targeting police officers and wanted to target them at their homes, what did Dan do? He called the police. Well, she is the police. Now, what did she do? She moved this information to the Michigan Intelligence Operations Center. And she moved this information about Joe Morrison being a potential threat. And what the Michigan Intelligence Operations Center is, think of it as the hub of the wheel that we used here in the state of Michigan, and terrorists and threat people who are police who believe that there may be a person who is a terroristic threat, move that information to the Michigan Intelligence Operations Center for handling, okay? And she moved that up. She was so concerned about her Marine, Joe Morrison, and his radicalization. She did the same thing Dan did. She was a bit of a mentor, and she was concerned about it. Now, she will also tell you that this day, when she served under Lieutenant Green, who was the gentleman that you saw a couple pictures ago, that it was obvious that this group wanted a violent confrontation. And although it's not a crime to be dangerous, you'll see that this behavior is indicative of their motive to help train a terrorist because they hated our government. Okay, we talked a little bit about the QRFs. I described one of them to you earlier, the 3rd of May. I'm going to briefly tell you about a couple of others. Remember, Bellar, think of him as the primary QRF person. I mean, he was an aggressive member of the gang. This was a guy who didn't fear anybody, and he knew his way around a weapon. They deployed a second time, Paul Bellar did with others, and they went down to Detroit. And remember, none of these guys live in the city of Detroit or Wayne County, okay? They were literally outsiders going down the Black Lives Matter protest on May 30th in downtown Detroit. And they went down there fully geared up, ballistic armor, long guns, sidearms, extra ammunition, their medical kits. And they went down there because Paul Bellar wasn't going to let the police do anything that he disagreed with. Essentially, Paul Bellar was going down to Detroit. Didn't even live in the same county. And he was going to go down and he was going to use this protest to police the police, okay? And when he did this, this is what he had to say about his intentions then. And I don't think it needs any context.
No, if they're all legal, I'm all legal. Yeah, I'm saying that straight up. I'm sorry, if I see a cop up there shooting civilians, I'm shooting that cop.
They go lethal, I'm going lethal. If I see a cop shooting a civilian, I'm gonna shoot the cop. He was gonna be judge, jury, and execution. He was gonna try to police the police. Next day, there's another Black Lives Matter protest in a different city. And again, a place that he didn't live, not even in the same county, it was up in Flint. They were having a march up in Flint that day. He went up there with a group of guys, again, all kitted up. They parked at the farmer's market less than a half mile away, minutes walk from the parade route on Saginaw. And they went up there with the same intention, to police the police. You're going to hear some testimony about how dangerous this situation was, both the Detroit QRF response and the Flint QRF, and how much of the law enforcement in Genesee County was working to make sure that these guys didn't do anything to harm others. Okay, talked about the national militia meeting in Dublin, Ohio a little bit ago. It's on the 6th of June. Again, it was hosted and sponsored by Barry Croft. Think of him as the national contact for the Boogaloo movement. Adam Fox is invited by Barry Croft and he attends. Joe Morrison and the Wolverine Watchmen are invited, but they decide not to go because, again, they're fearful of two things. One, either it's an ambush, or two, they might be arrested because it might be a trap by law enforcement. They communicate with Barry. Joe Morrison communicates with Barry Fox both before and after the meeting. The communication that he has after the meeting is that he should get in, Croft instructs Morrison, get in touch with Adam Fox. You see, the QRFs that Bellar is running are not enough for Joe Morrison. He wants national notoriety and he wants more power. And by June, he has grown his gang into a formidable force, okay? And he wanted to seek out like-minded people and be part of the national movement. And he has contact with Barry Croft afterwards. Croft gives him a thumbnail of what happened at the meeting. Within the meeting was to attempt to coordinate attacks in multiple states at the same time to kick off the movement. And Joe Morrison sends this message to the other members of the Wolverine Watchmen about his contact with Barry Croft and how the meeting went with different state representatives down in Dublin, which is just outside of Columbus. Oh, by the way, and that Boog Daddy Bunyan is his encrypted wired chat handle. Oh, by the way, the meeting in Columbus went well, and I have a contact here, Adam Fox. We need to do a meeting with. This is some real shit, guys. Beaker, his name is Dan Harris. It's of no moment right now, but he says, oh, good. And Joe Morrison replies, like real deal, get shit done MFers. What he's talking about is his belief in Adam Fox being like-minded and a terrorist. So let's talk about that meeting in Dublin a little bit. Who went? Adam Fox went. That's him on the left. Barry Croft. Notice Mr. Croft is sporting a Hawaiian shirt here again, part of the symbolism of the Boogaloo movement. And this is down in Dublin, Ohio. They're together flashing this sign, which is 3, because they consider themselves almost like the top 3% in America. They're the only ones brave enough to fight the government. Barry Croft organized the meeting. In fact, Barry Croft actually anointed Adam Fox as the commander of the 2nd Continental Regiment for Michigan. And the purpose, again, of this meeting was to coordinate attacks across multiple states. These guys were serious, ladies and gentlemen, and what you're about to hear is going to demonstrate that. What happened at this meeting and how do we know about it? Barry Croft had attracted the attention of the FBI also. And out of Baltimore, the Baltimore office of the FBI had opened an investigation into Barry Croft, and what you're about to hear here, you'll understand why. And because he was a national contact in the Boogaloo, I mean, he wanted to start the next Civil War, and he was serious about it. And the Baltimore office for the FBI had a confidential human source. This is an individual that had a recording device that was in the meeting. And this is what Barry Croft had to say about what his thoughts were and how they should proceed.
So we know that we have to take action. There are levels of action. Sharing the information, utilizing all these tools. I'm gonna go hurt people. I'm gonna go hurt people real fucking bad, and I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm gonna burn motherfucking houses down and blow shit up. I'm gonna do some of the most nasty, disgusting things that you have ever read about. And it gets rid of your life. I like them. Now listen, and I'm sorry for that. I really am. Well, no, because it's wrong. Because when I commandments, I was commanded, and I have to break that. Father, this is why. I've already asked permission. It's been granted. I'm not worried about it anymore. I'm not even gonna give it a second thought. If I have to fly through a motherfucker, burn his whole motherfucking family to the ground, knowing that I have one myself, I'm sorry. But I'm gonna do it.
Okay, that's Barry Croft. Remember, Barry Croft is the matchmaker between Adam Fox and Joe Morrison and the Wolverine Watchman. At the same time, in this meeting, who else is there? Adam Fox. This is what Adam Fox had to say after he heard what Barry Croft said.
I get them all at the same time. We said, there you have that. And human life is the value, right?
Are they gonna?
Now, we're not just taking ritual warnings. Now we actually have something that's valuable that we have as
He need to hit them all at the same time. He's talking about coordinated attack across multiple states. He says, taking tyrants hostages. What he's talking about there is politicians. He talks about human life has value. I told you, after this meeting, Croft communicates with Joe Morrison, says, get a hold of Adam Fox. 20 minutes later, Joe Morrison's reaching out on Facebook to Adam Fox. And Adam Fox replies back in a voice message on Facebook to Joe Morrison. Adam Fox replying back to Joe Morrison after the Dublin meeting.
Barry said we have the same common goal that I'm definitely need to know.
Barry, he's talking about there, Barry Croft. The same common goal they're talking about, killing police officers, political violence, and kicking off the Boogaloo. So we're still here in the part of the case, I think, where Joe Morrison and Paul Bellar and Pete Musico are seeking out other terrorists. And they connect with Adam Fox and they decide to have a meeting. And they do this meeting in Grand Rapids at the back shack where Mr. Fox worked and actually resided part of the time. And Joe Morrison doesn't go. He sends Paul Bellar. Paul Bellar is part of the leadership group. And they get there, and you're going to hear about this meeting, and it was recorded. And this is where, if you recall earlier this morning, I played a clip for you where Paul, Pete Musico, is describing the purpose of this meeting. You remember this is the one where he says, yeah, this is straight up about kicking it off, about pointing rifles at police officers and politicians and pulling the trigger. This isn't about getting prepped. That was Pete Musico's description of what the purpose of this meeting was in June. And they go to the meeting, and there is no doubt at that point in time of what Adam Fox wants to do. And he admits that he needs training. And Paul Bellar talks about how organized the Wolverine Watchmen are. And he also talks about the domino effect during this meeting. Paul Bellar talks about the domino effect and the spark that will start the movement. Okay, Paul Bellar wants to bring political violence to bear. Okay. So now that they have found somebody like Adam Fox, a like-minded individual who also wants to commit political violence, they train the terrorists. And where do they train them at? Right here in Jackson County, out on Dunn Road, at the house and property that Joe Morrison and Pete Musico resided. They provided the facility for the training, is what Pete Musico and Joe Morrison did. They provided the safe place for Adam Fox to come and hone his gun skills. They provided the skills for him. They taught him the skills that they already knew. It's on this date, and you're going to, hear during the course of this trial, and I'll get to it in a moment here, Paul Bellar leaves the state late July, early August. And the reason he leaves isn't because he's determined that his ways are wrong and that violence isn't the correct path. No, he's leaving the state for a couple of different reasons. One, he's out of money. He's being evicted. And two, he needs a roof over his house, over his head rather. His father lives in South Carolina, okay? He does not abandon the Boogaloo movement. Another reason that he leaves the state, and he actually leaves the Wolverine Watchmen in July, is because when he goes to this training where Adam Fox is at on the 28th of June, and he trains there with Adam Fox. Okay, he's part of the Wolverine Watchmen gang, providing training to Adam Fox there. This is where the crime is committed. And like we talked about in voir dire, you can't unrob a bank. So I don't care if Pete Musico went to South Carolina or the moon. Wherever he went, whenever he left the state of Michigan, he committed the crime charged on the 28th of June. They knew exactly what Fox was all about when they trained him on that day. They had already done the meeting at the back shack. Fox had explained his vision of political violence and what he wanted to do. And they chose to move forward with him and train him. He knew that Barry Croft connected them to Adam Fox. Morrison trained him twice. Musico and Bellar trained him once because Adam Fox also comes out on the 9th of August And that was the clip that I played for you early on in my opening, where Adam Fox was asking Joe Morrison, are you down for kidnapping high-profile people? Okay, that's when he makes that statement. Can't unrob a bank. Now, there is another, after the national militia meeting in Dublin, Ohio on the 6th of June, there's another meeting that takes place amongst multiple state representatives, if you will, of the militia movement or the Boogaloo movement. And that happens on the weekend of July the 11th, 2020. Now you'll see down here in the right, lower right-hand corner, Bellar, because of the dispute that he had with Joe Morrison's girlfriend, on the 28th of June, they had a training out at, I showed it to you earlier. That's when Bellar, Musical, and Morrison are all out on Dunn Road and they're training Adam Fox and providing a training location for Adam Fox to come and hone his weapon skills. Paul Bellar brings his girlfriend to this. And there is a dispute by Joe Morrison's wife that no other women are not invited to this training. And Paul Bellar does not agree with this. And this is one of the things that leads him to leave the Wolverine Watchman, probably the primary driving force behind it, coupled with his economic situation that causes him to move on and form his own group. It's called the Ghost Group. And it's also what causes him to eventually leave the state, go to South Carolina, and two things of note. He leaves the Wolverine Watchman. The evidence is going to show you he communicates directly with Adam Fox. Okay. And Adam Fox, again, being a terrorist they trained, and he tells Adam Fox, I'm leaving the Wolverine Watchman, but I'm still part of the movement. The movement he's talking about is the Boogaloo, the desire for anarchy. Number two, when he goes down to South Carolina, he reports back to Michigan and his friends in Michigan. I've started my own group down here called the Palmetto Goons. Okay, another boo. He breaks off and he forms this ghost group, and he brings some of the Wolverine Watchman members with him. Actually, the people, some of the people that go with him are some of the better terrorists, if you will. They're better at weapons and things like that. They come up with their own code words, this ghost group does, and they use these words to avoid detection from law enforcement. In fact, when he leaves, he brings the encrypted chat wire, communication system wire with him, okay? And he continues to maintain, the secrecy of the group through using this encrypted system. This training that happens up in Cambria, Wisconsin, let's talk about that for a minute. Who attends? Barry Croft goes. So does Adam Fox. So does Paul Bellar. An undercover FBI agent. If you remember the first screen that I showed you had the two terrorists at the top of it, Barry Croft and Adam Fox, and they had the defendants in the middle. The people on the bottom, one of the people was Undercover Mark. He was an undercover agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He is a highly trained individual with that crap. He is going to testify for you. And he's going to tell you a little bit about what happened up in Cambria. What happened up in Cambria was Paul Bellar was up there along with Adam Fox, and they trained with these other people. Think of Cambria as an extension of Dublin. Many of the people that were in Dublin, many of the groups, I should say, went up to Cambria in July to train. What they were training for was the kickoff of the Boogaloo. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you, this is a kill house, is the way it's described. And what you have here is you have Paul Bellar. He is the second from the left. Okay, and the reason they're training in a kill house is, I ask you, does this look defensive or offensive?
Unit ready? You can commence firing. Seize.
Okay, Morrison goes on to train Fox a second time and provide his property as a facility to Adam Fox for training. And this is where, again, where Fox asks him if he's down for kidnapping high-profile people. He says, "You know I am." The defendants were arrested on the 7th of June. The reason they were arrested then is because you're going to hear that Adam Fox, a number of gang members from the Wolverine Watchmen, former gang members, because they went into the ghost group, went on to conduct surveillances of the governor's summer cottage in northern Michigan. Their plan was to kill the entire security detail of Michigan State troopers who were sworn to protect her, kidnap her, and kill her. Adam Fox, the man they trained, got to the end of the driveway of the governor's summer cottage. That's how close they got. He went up there and surveilled it, not once, but twice. And the reason they did that, the reason they surveilled it, they didn't act immediately, is because they viewed themselves as military-like operators. Okay? You're going to hear that word. And they wanted to make sure they scouted the terrain, they knew where the escape points were, that they had a plan of how they were going to infiltrate the property, how they were going to kill the security detail, and how they were going to extract her. These men knew who Adam Fox was when they trained him. At the end of this, you're going to see that these defendants promoted terrorism. They sought out terrorists, they found them, they gave him training, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is why we're here today. Now, I've taken up a good portion of the morning here. We've been going for quite a while. You have been very patient and attentive, and I thank you for that very much. I'm going to ask, we're probably going to take a break here if I had to imagine. And after we do, if they choose to, and they don't have to, because they don't have any burden of proof here as to the elements of the crime charge. But if they elect to, the attorneys who represent the defendants will be allowed to rise as I did and give an opening statement to you about what they think the evidence will show during the course of this. I'm going to ask you to give them the same kind attention that you gave me. And thank you very much for that. Thank you, Judge.
Okay, he's right. We're gonna be taking a break. Keep moving around. Restroom, get a drink, whatever you want to do. There's vending machines up on 5 in the hallway, which I'm sure you saw for the last couple days. And figure 5-10 minutes, I'll have the bailiff come back and check, and once you're all back in the jury room, get started again.
Give me just 1 minute, okay?
Okay. All rise for the jury.
However, yes, we're gonna work for you. Well, figure out all that.
Take a few minutes. Our cameras, I had people come in to set these cameras up. Somebody moved the tables.
Was that Gabby?
I think
I moved the podium.
It's
No,
not over just,
Mr.
I think Cody or Corey
Mr.
moved
Kirkpatrick
these.
wanted the podium here, and so yesterday
Well,
we
not
did.
in between
We're
us,
sorry,
just
Judge.
here.
no.
We didn't
I-
realize that.
We
it was
can
gonna
move
be
The
them back.
problem is when you move forward, and we've got people we've been contacted by numerous news outlets and let them know we're gonna YouTube it. But as soon as you go around that podium, you go out of sight. And they wanted to see who was talking.
So they were emailing me, asking me who was
And I
speaking.
appreciate the media's concern, and
Well,
but the
because,
record was complete. Is that right?
yes, there was no problem with picking you up on we're tracking.
Okay.
That's one of the main things we look at all the time to make sure we're picking you up.
Okay.
But because of the interest in the case, and trying to cut down on the number of people going in and out of here, we've
Yeah.
streamed it. But I need the table, just if you move it over about a half a foot or so,
Yes, sir.
and then move that podium over just a little bit, and then it shouldn't be a problem.
Do you need me to do it again?
No. Now we know, but
I'm here nonstop, so
Take two, Mr. DeMille.
just pull it over a little bit.
All right.
That should do it.
That's as far as.
Yep, that'll be fine.
That's good.
If you can move it over a little bit, we'll be on.
Thank you, Judge. We have like
Get
10
back.
minutes.
5-10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah. The jurors get all back in there, we'll start back up.
So this can be okay if I just put my bag in this box?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I just
If
don't.
you even want to just take over, that's pretty close to date.
Yeah, it's just right there because it's, today or, for him or Corey or whoever's trying to squeeze behind me. it's almost-
Well, if we
This is
move
fine
it
if I'm
to-
okay here. You
We're
good?
gonna probably need to move it. We can't see. defendant
You can't see
number
Kareem?
3. No, we can see Kareem. We can't see the defendant.
But I don't need Kareem's head to get bigger.
I know.
I did.
get their attention and you've written your question down, for instance, when we're taking testimony and you're not sure about something or you have more questions, you can write your question down, get a hold of one of the, or get their attention or get my attention. You know, if you go like this, I'll stop the thing, find out if you have a question. We'll take that question. Obviously, I gotta let the attorneys take a look at it, and then it'll get covered at that time. Patrick.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I too want to thank you for your service, being a juror. I know it's not difficult. You've got to give time out of your life. We went through that painstakingly the last 2 days. This part of when I talk to jurors is like my mom used to call the Paul Harvey time. For those of us old enough to remember Paul Harvey, it's the rest of the story. There's one thing that Mr. Wallstein and I agree on, 100% unequivocally. That is, the terrorists in this case are Adam Fox and Barry Croft. I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree that they are I'll call them a lunatic, I'll call them crazy, call it what you will. They are the ones that are the problem in this case. So what that does, ladies and gentlemen, is it allows for me to fast forward all the way to June 14th. Now, as you saw a minute ago, there's a lot of information in this case. There's a lot of evidence in this case. This case investigation spans from November of 2019 all the way until October of 2020. Everything that happened up to June 14th, anything relating to Mr. Beller, I will address that through the testimony, through the witnesses. There's no reason to address that, and here's why. The reason why is because up until June 14th, Adam Fox and Barry Croft were not a part of Mr. Beller's world at all. He didn't know Adam Fox, didn't know of Adam Fox, had never met Adam Fox. There is a training on June 14th in Munich that Mr. Beller, I'm going to call him Paul, it makes it easier for me to say Paul than Mr. Beller. There's a training that Mr. Beller, here I go. That Paul goes to on June 14th for the Wolverine Watchmen. Now, it's true, Paul was a member of the Wolverine Watchmen. I concede that. And it's true that Paul wanted to do training in preparation of what may happen in the United States of America. I concede that. And as I said in voir dire, it's also true that Paul said a lot of things that you're not going to agree with and a lot of things that are going to make you upset. But Paul's not here on trial for making a terrorist threat. And you all promised me in the beginning that you would make sure that the prosecuting attorney proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt regarding whether or not he materially supported an act of terrorism. In his opening, he said, ladies and gentlemen, the act of terrorism in this case is Adam Fox and Barry Croft. He said that to me. And that's why June 14th and July 29th of 2020 is important in this case. At the conclusion of the training on June 14th, Paul left early. There was some communication with Adam Fox. Paul wasn't involved in it. Later that night, Dan, who you were introduced to a minute ago, the informant for the FBI, makes a call to Adam Fox. Paul's not with him. Mr. Musico's not with him. Mr. Morrison's not with him. The informant for the FBI makes a call to Adam Fox and says, hey, Wolverine Watchman, I'm Dan. I'm the tactics guy here. Maybe you ought to want to come train with us. Maybe you ought to want to come down to Munich, Michigan and train with this group. Okay? So that phone call takes place. Paul doesn't know about this phone call. Paul doesn't know about any communication on June 14th. June 18th, there's a protest at the Capitol. Paul attends that protest. Adam Fox attends that protest. Now, they're not in the same group. Adam Fox is there. Paul's there. They meet. They meet at that protest. There's some words exchanged. Yes, they're armed. Yes, they have their kit on. My client walks up to the front door of the Capitol, armed. He stands in line like everyone else. He goes up, and we're talking 2020 now, so it's COVID-19. He answers all the COVID-19 questions. If you have a fever, you've been sick, blah, 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 takes his temperature, goes into the Capitol legally. He's legally armed. There's no law against being armed in the Capitol. Protest goes on. There's some yelling in there. There's some disagreements. He leaves. The testimony in this case will be there was no law violated by Paul at that Capitol. Now let's fast forward to June 20th. June 20th, the prosecutor played a clip a minute ago of Mr. Musico, and let me get this out again. I know we talked about this in voir dire. You understand that I represent Paul and I represent Paul alone, correct? And we talked about, you're going to hear a lot of evidence in this case. Some of the evidence is going to pertain to Paul. Some of the evidence is going to pertain to Mr. that doesn't pertain to Mr. Morrison or Mr. Musico, and vice versa. So there's some things that'll pertain to all of them, some things that'll pertain to some of them. My job is to represent Paul, and that's the arguments that I'm making here in front of you today, and will continue so until this case is done. Paul's not around when they're discussing why they're going to the shop vac to meet Adam Fox. Paul doesn't know anything about Adam Fox. He wants to figure out what Adam Fox is about. He goes to the shop vac. There's all kinds of crazy talk in the shop vac. Talks about getting a conservative sheriff to do a complaint, to try to get an arrest warrant, to take it to a conservative judge, to get an arrest warrant, to then go on the governor. We talked about some other things in that meeting. My client engaged a little bit in that conversation, but ladies and gentlemen, here's what's pivotal about June 20th. My client, Mr. Paul, walks out of the shop vac. What does he do? Does he say, hey, wow, that guy's sweet. Love his ideas. Want to be a part of his group? Nope. He tells the informant, Dan, therefore he tells the FBI, because Dan works directly for the FBI, that guy's crazy. That guy is crazy. Now, from June 20th to June 28th, you're going to hear about some more communication between Adam Fox and other individuals about this training on the 28th of June in Munich. My client's not a part of any of it. None of them. My client shows up on June 28th for training in Munich after he's told the informant Adam Fox is crazy, and here comes Adam Fox to train. They train. My client doesn't actually train Adam Fox on that day. He doesn't actually put Adam Fox on that day. And what you're going to learn about Adam Fox is Adam Fox is already in a militia, 3%ers. Adam Fox already has his kit. Adam Fox already has his rifle. Adam Fox already has his group. Adam Fox already has his training. And in fact, at that training on June 28th, I believe it was June 28th, he wanted Paul to swear into his group, the 3%ers. Did Paul do it? Nope. Be a part of him. At the conclusion of this training on June 28th, ladies and gentlemen, there is a congregation of individuals around a truck or outside, and there's talk of political violence. There's potential talk of maybe getting involved in kidnapping, things along those lines. Paul's not involved in those conversations. Same thing. June 28th, 2020, Paul leaves the Wolverine Watchman. After that meeting, excuse me, he leaves the Wolverine Watchman. After he's told it's the S word, get off the pot, either you're a part of this or you're not, what does he do? He leaves. He leaves the Wolverine Watchman for good. And how do we know this? We know this for a couple reasons. Because the informant, Dan, after he tells Dan on June 28th, I'm leaving the Watchman, basically, we'll get into in testimony why he left. I disagree with the prosecutor. You're the trier of fact. I think you'll see it clearly, and we'll wait for that. But I want you to pay attention to why he really did leave the group. We know he left the group also because Dan, the informant, now Dan works for the FBI, okay? And Dan does what Dan works for them in essence. And you heard the prosecutor in the beginning say, well, look, you know, Dan can't get involved in anything. Dan can't post stuff. Dan can't encourage things. Dan has to kind of go with the flow, right? You heard him say that. So Dan, June 29th, day after Paul has made it clear he's leaving the group, sends a text message to his FBI handler. You know what that text message says? It says this: Doc's leaving the group. And you already know from the opening, Doc is Paul's nickname. Doc's leaving the group. Does he leave it at that? No. His next text message. Get him with Adam. This is the informant working for the FBI in this investigation who is asking the handler, who is an FBI agent, should I get Paul with Adam Fox, the one that in their opening said is the terrorist that Paul is the one that trained. So is the response from the FBI, no, let's hold off. He's left the group. Let's see kind of where he goes. Let's see if he does something that brings him back into the group. Let's see if he continues down this path of terrorism, as they want to characterize it. You don't do that. You know what the response is? Good idea. Good idea. Let's get Paul back with that. Paul wants to leave this group, but let's bring him back in. Now, this is after the FBI knows that Paul thinks that Adam Fox is crazy, because he told the informant at the shop vac, that man is crazy. He has no more contact with Adam Fox from June 20th until June 28th, when they go to training and Adam Fox is there. And when that training ends, he leaves the watchman. Now he goes off and he starts a group. And there's a meeting on July 7th. And I don't dispute that. And this is the ghost group, or the QRF, that the people talk about, this quick reactionary force, this ghost group that Paul's creating. And I suspect during the testimony, they're going to talk about, oh, this is this group and they're under the radar. And this is the one that links up with Adam Fox. And this is the one that moves on with this plot for kidnapping. Dan goes to this meeting on July 7th. Beginning of that meeting, there's talk about, hey, that stuff that happened in training on June 28th, which is the one that we left right after, that stuff they were talking about, politicians, political violence, I ain't about that. Ain't about that. I'm here to train, defend myself. I'm here for training. What does Paul say? What does he say on July 7th? Ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be facts and evidence. This isn't me talking right now. What does Paul say? Now I'm paraphrasing. You will get the full gist of it. You will hear the full gist of it. I'm going to paraphrase for you right now what he said. Mission statement. And I don't care if you're in the military. I don't care if you're law enforcement. I don't care if you work in a corporation. I don't care what you do for a living. I think all of us know what a mission statement is. Mission statement is, what are we about? What's this group about that we're forming here? What is our reason for being? What are we gonna be about? He says, our mission statement is defensive. We're not going to be the aggressors in the state of Michigan. He says, Paul, my client, says, we are not going to be the aggressors in the state of Michigan. We are going to train defensively. We are going to train in the event that I need to defend myself. We need to defend others. We need to defend the Constitution. That's not all he says, though. Guess what else he says? And pardon my language. He says, we're not about black bagging fucking black bagging politicians, pull them out of their cars and pull them out of their homes. He says that. He makes it very clear in that group on July 7th that he creates this supposed QRF ghost group, that they're not about kidnapping black bagging politicians. Dan's at this, okay? The informant Dan, he's at this meeting. And yet again, does Dan sit back and say, wow, maybe they don't want to train offensive. Maybe they're not down for kidnapping politicians. Maybe they are down for just defending themselves. Maybe they are down just to train defensively in case they have to defend themselves. I'm going to let this ride. Let's see where this goes. I'm not going to say anything because, again, an informant's not supposed to, post, encourage. They're supposed to just inform. Is that what he does? No. after Paul gives his mission statement of this group, Dan says, well, Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin is that training you heard about in the prosecutor's opening statement in Cambria, Wisconsin, the training that they just put up on the thing. Dan says, well, Wisconsin. It's going to be offensive. And again, I'm paraphrasing, ladies and gentlemen. This was said, you'll be able to hear the audio. Offensive. Keep an open mind. This is the informant of the FBI telling Paul and this group, who just made it abundantly clear that they are defensive, they're not offensive, they're not about black bagging politicians, they're training to defend themselves or to defend somebody else. That's July 7th, ladies and gentlemen. And at that particular moment in time, Adam Fox had been to one training, one with Paul. The training that Paul left on. He had met Paul at the Capitol for moments, and he had met Paul at the shop vac, which, by the way, you're going to hear the shop vac meeting that Paul went to. It wasn't, he didn't walk into the shop vac and, oh, let's sit down in some comfy couches and have a chat. It was a trap door going into a basement that was dungeness. He had to give up his phone at the door. Adam's down there smoking pot, getting high and talking craziness, and my client had never met him before. That's where he's at when this June 20th meeting takes place. And again, like I said a minute ago, he makes it clear when he walks out of that meeting, that guy is crazy. So, July 7th, when Dan is suggesting Wisconsin, he goes on, he said, keep an open mind, it's offensive. There's going to be some big hitters there. There was a meeting in Dublin. I'm going to tell you right now, my client, Paul didn't know what happened in Dublin. Paul didn't know all the heavy hitters that were going to this thing in Wisconsin. Dan did. Dan worked for the FBI. He knew this investigation was going on. Dan goes on to say at that July 7th meeting, I'm going, Adam's going, Noel brothers are going. You haven't heard about them yet, but you will. It doesn't say Paul's going. One time say Paul's going. Guess what? Paul got talked into it. Paul had no money. Paul couldn't get there. Guess how Paul got there? The FBI got Dan got a car rental paid for by the FBI. I'm assuming. They paid for his travel there and back. They paid for his food. They paid for his clothes or his alcohol. They paid for his ammunition. They paid for everything so Paul could attend this training in Wisconsin. The only thing that I think was split is I think someone in the group may have helped Dan, who again is working for the FBI, to pay for half the hotel. So we're at a meeting, July 7th, defensive, not offensive. We're not about black bagging politicians. We're going to defend if we have to defend ourselves or others. We're not about this. 4 days later, he's being taken to Wisconsin by the informant Dan. And why is that important? I'll tell you why it's important. It's important because the text message that Dan sends to his handler after Doc leaves the Watchman on June 28th and says, Doc's leaving the group, should I get him with Adam? The response is, good idea. Getting Paul to Wisconsin was pivotal. Why? Adam was going to be there. Oh, and guess who else is there? Barry Croft. Paul had never met Barry Croft in his life. You will hear no testimony, no evidence, nothing that Paul ever met Barry Croft. And it's funny how the people play that audio of Barry Croft. Oh, I'm going to hurt people really bad. I'm going to hurt people really bad. That doesn't pertain to my client. Because A, my client didn't say any of that. B, my client wasn't with him when he said that. And C, that's the first time Paul ever met him. And what happens when Paul meets him? Paul doesn't train him in Cambria. Paul gets up at a certain point in Cambria, Wisconsin, where they're doing some medical training. and there's other medical staff there, and they were doing something wrong with something, which will come in the evidence. I promise. Very little training did he do on this kind of thing. He didn't train very crop. At night, it was either that, the first night or the second night, July 11th or July 12th. They go out to dinner. Take Paul to dinner. Guess who's at this dinner? Paul's there. Dan Harris is there. I believe Brandon Concert is there. Adam Fox is there. Barry Croft is there at that dinner. Informant Dan is there at that dinner. Guess where Paul is? Paul's at the end of the table, drunker than a skunk, not even engaging in the conversation, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, is happening at the front of the table. And who does it involve? Adam Fox, Croft, Informant Dan. There may have been, my mind slips right now, there may have been one more person up at the front and some wives. Paul wasn't there. Paul wasn't up there in this powwow. July 12th, they leave Wisconsin, go back. The next training that Paul does is on June 26th. Fowler. Adam Fox isn't there. Barry Croft isn't there. Joe Morrison isn't there. Pete Musico isn't there. Paul's there. You're going to get testimony in this case that training was offensive in nature. The purpose of that training was offense. And ladies and gentlemen, you're going to hear this a lot in this case, so I'll just get it out now. It's very important for the people to say offensive, offensive, OPSEC, offensive, offensive, because offensive suggests that you're wanting to go out and do something offensive. Watch the video that I know you're going to see, and you'll remember it. It's a PT Cruiser. It's in Fowlerville. My client's in the front seat, in the driver's seat. Another individual in the passenger seat. They're going to claim, "Oh, this is offensive training." Watch the video. It's training of my client, Paul, getting out of the vehicle, firing his rifle, getting behind the vehicle, firing his rifle. It doesn't take a military man. It doesn't take anyone with any common sense to understand what is offensive maneuvers and what is defensive maneuvers. And when you see this, you say, well, that's a defensive maneuver. June 29th, here we go. I'm sorry, July 29th, here we go. Paul sends out a message to the group. "Hey guys, I'm leaving. Going back to South Carolina. We'll live with my dad. I'm going to stack up some cash. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get my EMS, get a job as a firefighter. See you later. I'm out of here. I'd like to come back and see you guys again, maybe come back and train." Paul leaves in 2 days of that message. He's out of the state of Michigan by August 1st. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to tell you right now, the facts and evidence in this case are going to be undisputable that on July 29th, when Paul left the state of Michigan, he had broken no laws. He had broken no laws in any protests. He had broken no laws at the QRFs, the Black Lives Matter protests, all the stuff they want to talk about, all the stuff that the prosecutor showed you a minute ago, all of that. I knew they were going to painstakingly go through that. That's why I told you, you promised me that you would keep an open mind throughout this entire trial, because there's a lot more to the story. Now, when he leaves August 1st, he never comes back to the state of Michigan until he's arrested in October. Did go back to South Carolina. Did get a job working at DoorDash. He did start looking into going back to school. He was doing what he said he was going to do. Not part of what was going on here. The other undisputed evidence would be that he left the state of Michigan. There was no plan to kidnap Governor Whitmer. There was no plan to go and kidnap any politician. There was a whole lot of talk, the majority of which you will see my client wasn't even involved in. Ladies and gentlemen, the plan or the idea of kidnapping Governor Whitmer didn't really even start gaining speed until about the first part of August, after he's already left. Not involved in any more training. And, after August, when he leaves, We're not talking about just a little bit of training, ladies and gentlemen, Adam Fox. We're talking about numerous trainings, numerous meetings, going up to the governor's vacation home, looking at bridges to blow up, to slow down response time, trying to purchase explosives to potentially blow up a bridge, doing water surveillance, nighttime surveillance. Paul wasn't a part of any of that. None of it. And you're also going to hear a name, and I promise you I'm almost done. I don't want to bore you guys too much. You're also going to hear a name, Eric Molitor. Please remember that name for me. Because Eric Molitor is an individual who is connected to Adam Fox. In fact, Eric Molitor is, and I quote, Adam Fox's medic. So all this, oh boy, we got to show that Paul, trained some medical training to these guys one time. And Paul was out there firing his weapon, doing some training one time. Now he has materially supported a terrorist act. Give me a break. You are going to hear some testimony on August 18th. There's going to be a wire chat where Paul says, hey, the police came to my house looking around. There might be a mole. I'm paraphrasing. You're going to be able to read it. There might be a mole. I think I'm going to ghost for a while, get off social media, whatever. It's going to be an exhibit to the people, okay? They're going to leave something out. I'm going to put in. And that is at the end, remember August 18th. At the end of that August 18th warning, if you will, Paul says, exactly, we haven't done anything illegal. They were basically saying, why are you, but what are you worried about? And he said, exactly, we haven't done anything illegal. In his mind, ladies and gentlemen, in his mind, he had done nothing illegal. He left the state of Michigan on or about July 29th, a day or two later. The FBI agent, I'm sure, will testify that on July 29th, he broke no laws. He had no idea what was going on back here regarding Governor Whitmer because, I almost forgot this, and thank God I didn't. Dan leaves the Watchman right around the first part of October time. What does he do? He handpicks 3 guys out of the July 7th meeting with Paul, where he created this ghost group, where he made it clear that they were defensive and not offensive, and they weren't about blackbagging politicians. What does Dan do? Model the Watchman. I'll take you, I'll take you, I'll take you. Oh, and there's these ridiculous code words they'll be telling you about. We'll talk about those when they actually come up in the testimony. I'm gonna take you, you, and you, and I'm gonna take these code words, and we're gonna go link up with Adam Fox. Ladies and gentlemen, Paul is long gone. Doesn't know any of this is going on. Not a part of any of it. That's why he said we've done nothing illegal. Ladies and gentlemen, the prosecuting attorney read you the correct jury instructions. And here they are, and you're going to get them. And you do not need to memorize them because you're going to have them, and you're going to be able to look at them. You'll be able to deliberate. There's a couple things I want to point out to you. Providing material support for an act of terrorism. It's undisputed, because the prosecutor said in his opening statement, that the terrorism is Adam Fox and Barry Croft. So whenever you got a connection between Paul and Adam Fox and Barry Croft, that's relevant. That is relevant because that is, ladies and gentlemen, what they have to prove. They have to prove that Paul materially supported Adam Fox and Barry Croft. All this other, we're going to do a QRF and go down to the Home Depot, and man, if the cops show up, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and man, we're going to go here, we're going to go to this protest, and if the cops light it up, we're going to do this and that. All that means nothing. It means nothing because Barry Croft and Adam Fox are the terrorism. The plot to kidnap the governor is the terrorist act, and so any information or evidence that links Paul to those 2 guys or the Terrorist Act, I would submit to you is very relevant. Ladies and gentlemen, they are not going to be able to meet their burden that Paul provided the defendant with any material support. And the only one that they could even look at is training, because when you look at this jury instruction, that defendant provided material support in the form of currency or other financial security, financial services, lodging. Well, we know he's broke. We know he didn't give him any money, didn't give him any bullets, didn't give him, I know the proper word is rounds, by the way, but I want to say bullets because most people understand bullets. Didn't give him any bullets, didn't give him any explosives. He was deathly afraid of explosives. That's going to come out in this trial too. He didn't want anything to do with explosives. Personnel? Nope, he didn't give anybody. Well, in a roundabout way, he did. When he created his group on July 7th, and the FBI, or I'm sorry, informant Dan decides, let me pluck a couple after Paul's already left the state. Transportation? Nope. Any other related physical asset? Zero. But what the prosecution wants you to believe is he goes to training one time in Munich with Adam Fox, goes to training in Wisconsin that Adam Fox attends, and meets Barry Crawford the first time in Wisconsin. That, ladies and gentlemen, is material support to a terrorist act? I don't think so. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. The gang-motivated crimes. You're going to get a jury instruction. Jury instructions on the gang-motivated crime. And they put, remember they put the PowerPoint, and forgive me, I don't do PowerPoints, I'm kind of a little more old school, I just shoot from my head. They put the PowerPoint up there about what gang means, what it is for a gang. You recall that one? They left out a very, 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 very crucial element. You know what that is? To prove that a group of persons was a gang, the prosecutor must prove that it was a group of 5 or more persons who, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, had a continuing relationship with each other. They have to prove that, ladies and gentlemen. And they have to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt. And they are not going to be able to. I'm going to end you with this. When you go into deliberations, I am confident, beyond confident, as it pertains to Paul, you are going to find the prosecuting attorney has not met its burden of proof. We went through voir dire, and I think Mr. Rolston probably did this 100 times. This is probable cause. This is something else. Our proof beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm sorry. This is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. This is something else. Now, we're not going to let anybody inflate it. We're not going to let anybody deflate it. Well, let me give you just a quick little lesson on what the burden of proofs are. And I promise you, it's like 2 seconds. You look like you're getting a little tired of hearing me. I think it's important for you to hear this, though, because a lot of people lose track of what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. And I agree with the prosecutor. He's right. It's not proof beyond a shadow of a doubt, because then nobody would ever get convicted. Shadow of a doubt. I mean, you basically got to find the guy on video with a gun in his hand. But there are burdens of proof in our judicial system, both criminal and civil. And each side has their own burden of proof. And I think it's kind of important for me to illustrate these burdens of proofs to you to give you kind of an idea of where we're at. On the criminal side, the first burden of proof is reasonable suspicion. Okay? Basically, what that does is it allows a police officer to stop you in your car, to restrict your movement. If you're in an area and they believe crime is afoot, or they believe that you've committed a crime or that you're armed, they have a right to go up and make contact. They have a right to pat you down, to get weapons on you, restrict your movements. You run a stop sign, they think you're speeding, whatever, they pull your car over. Stop your movement, write your ticket. Next is probable cause. Probable cause is what an officer needs to arrest you. That's all an officer needs to arrest you. So when I asked you before, just because somebody's on trial, like me, I'm always like, wait a minute. Well, I used to be, not anymore. If you're on trial, you got arrested, man, you must have done something wrong. Had to be. That's just not the case, because it's a probable cause standard to make an arrest. It's also a probable cause standard for a case like this to get to circuit court where a juror of their peers makes the decision of their guilt and innocence. The civil aspect of that is called preponderance of the evidence, which is basically 51% or more. You know, is it more likely than not? Up here, then you have clear and convincing evidence on the civil side. Which is pretty close to what proof beyond a reasonable doubt is. But do you know what they can do by clear and convincing evidence? They can strip you of your children forever. Government. That's how high that burden is, ladies and gentlemen. It terminates criminal rights. On the criminal side, the equivalent to clear and convincing is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And ladies and gentlemen, when you hear all the testimony, when you go back and look at all the exhibits, watch the videos, listen to what you have to listen to, hear what you have to say, and listen to my closing in the end, I'm confident that you're going to find the prosecution has failed to meet its burden on materially supporting a terrorist act. And I'm confident you're going to find that Paul was not a member of the gang. He didn't meet the statute. Oh, by the way, if you find that Paul did not materially contribute to a terrorist act, everything else falls like dominoes. Because without the conviction for material supporting a terrorist act, you have no gang because the gang requires you to break the law. So you've got no breaking of the law, and the felony firearm requires you to break the law while you're possessing a firearm. So everything rises and falls on the very first one, and they're not even going to get there. Thank you.
Too close to lunchtime.
I plan on sending them the link if she wants them to get paid after Dave can send them one as they're coming back, or they can get their pay, just bring them to get things moving.
Everything I said was true.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see everybody back here about 1:15. If you could just go back to the jury room when you get done with lunch. We're checking about sure you get paid. I think what I'm going to do is have bring it down to you. Not waiting in a long line up there. See everyone back here at 1:15.
Oh, so you just give me 1 minute? Jurors, give me 1 minute.